Alright, so first I'm just going to erase some of these. I don't really need them. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another layer that's specifically for the hazards. So I'm going to go under grid, create 2D object, tile map. Tile map number 2, we'll call it hazards. And then we're going to put these spiky guys, maybe say 2 of them up here, and say one of them right there. Okay, great. Now we're going to give this a tile map collider 2D. And oh shoot, I actually made a mistake because we have to make sure that our active tile map is set to hazards. So actually erase them and go back and change it to hazards, and now you'll see that the hazards tile map is selected. So now if we put them down, then you'll see that their colliders show up under hazards and the rest of it shows up under tile map. So we also have to make sure that this is set to obstacles, and if we play right now, we'll see that the player collides with them, great, but he's not actually getting hurt or anything. So we're gonna have to add that in. Oh, you can't even reach the upper level. Here, let's just give him a bit of a runway then. Oops, that's on hazards. So you have to change that back to tile map so that this is on tile map. Otherwise, what you'll notice is that the tile map will actually hurt the player. If we draw like normal blocks onto tile map, then it'll end up hurting the player, and that's not what we want. Okay, so now if we play, then player can reach there. Okay, great, but he's touching the hazards and nothing is happening to him. So first, let's create a script. Let's create a new folder, actually, call it world. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering about these new sprites here, I just added them in from the from the PRT jail set, and I just did the same thing that we did last episode for mapping. So you can go to that episode if you want to know how I did it, but yeah, basically these just have colliders that work, and so yeah, that's it. Let's create a new C# script, call it contact hazard, and we're actually going to use this later for enemies too, for enemies that hurt the player upon touching him. Okay, first thing we're going to say is we're going to have a public float called damage on hit. So this is how much damage it's going to deal to the player on hit. Then we're going to have a void on collision 2D. Does it say 2D? Collision call. If call dot game object dot compare tag is player, then we'll debug.log collided with player. Great. So now we go to the player and make sure that he has a player tag. So we're getting an error. Right, this has to be a collision 2D, my bad. So now if we play, you'll notice that when we jump on these guys, nothing actually happens. Oh wait, we actually have to attach the script. That's not the issue that I was going for, but okay, now if we play, you'll see that nothing actually happens when we touch the player, or when we touch the hazard. And the reason for that is that the player actually needs a hitbox. Right now, the box collider that's on the player is meant for colliding with the environment, but we need another one for colliding with hazards, because you actually need a rigid body for colliders to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an empty under the player, call it hitbox. Make sure that it's tagged player, and we'll give it a box collider and a, wait, wrong type. Box collider 2D, give it a rigid body 2D, and we want it to be slightly larger than the normal one. So the normal one is 0.5 and 1. So we're going to make this one 0.51 and 1.05 or 1.01. That way it's 0.1 larger on both sides, or 0.01 I mean. Then for the rigid body, we want to constrain position and rotation, and you might get this little warning message, but ignore that. Now if we play the game, you'll see that when we touch the hazard, it says that it collided with the player, which is great. That's exactly what we want. So now we actually have to get to making it do something with the player. And we're not going to get into health this episode, but what we are going to do is we're going to play the animation for when the player gets hurt. So how that works is that the player will jump up a little bit and he'll start blinking for about 2 seconds. And during those 2 seconds, he's invincible. So he can still move around and he'll still animate properly, but he's invincible, and his sprite will start blinking on and off to show that he's invincible. So we're gonna have a public float called time invincible, which we're gonna default out to 2 seconds. Then we're gonna have a couple bools. We're gonna say bool invincible, bool force applied, and I think that should be it for now. I'll get into what both of those mean. So firstly, we're gonna make a public function called public void get apply damage, and it's gonna take a float damage. And we only want to apply damage if we're not invincible. So say if not invincible, then for now we're just going to debug out player took damage, points of damage. Great. So now for the fun part, the physics and the animation. So what we're going to do is we have to create a private function. We'll do that under here. So let's do it all the way down, because I want to put it after the update functions. Say private void set velocity. Then we'll take in a vector2 v. Then we'll say velocity equals v, and we want to set apply or force applied equals true. So how force applied is going to work is we're going to go back into vertical, and we're going to say if force applied, then force applied equals false, and else, then this will happen. And the reason we do that is because if we don't do this, then if the player hits the enemy, then it'll just register as there's a collision from below or above, if they hit them from above or below, and the velocity will be set to 0. We don't want that. We want the player to bounce a little bit. So this way, if force is applied, then it'll ignore this equalization. All right, so we're gonna set velocity to vector2.up times about 8.0f. And finally, for the invincibility part, we're going to want a coroutine. So we're going to say private coroutine, or no, private I enumerator set invincible. So we're going to start off with the float called elapsed time, and we're going to set it to 0. Then we're going to say while elapsed time is lower than invincible time, or time invincible, then we're going to want to add to elapsed time 0.04 seconds, yield return new wait 4 seconds 0.04, and this is where we're gonna have the blinking. So this is gonna happen every 4 milliseconds. So we're gonna say sprite render dot enabled equals sprite render dot enabled is the opposite. So if it's on, it'll turn off, and if it's off, it'll turn on. This will happen every 4 milliseconds, so it'll have like a little blinking effect. We're gonna say sprite renderer dot enabled equals true. We're doing that after it's all done, so that we make sure that like it doesn't cancel out and the player is invisible. And all right, in the beginning, invincible is going to be set to true, and after it's done, it's going to be set to off. So now all we have to do is we have to go to contact hazard, and instead of debugging that we collided with the player, we're going to say player equals call dot game object dot get component in parent player. And the reason we're getting this from the parent is because the hitbox is a child of the actual player object. Then we're going to say, and just to check again, this isn't really necessary, but like it's just good practice. Player doesn't equal null, and player dot apply damage on hit. Now you might be wondering why this is on collision stay, and that's really just a safety measure because on collision enter only fires once, so that would work technically, but there could be times where it just doesn't fire and the player could just sit on the enemy, and this way it makes sure that it fires. And the reason that it's not going to fire every frame is because we already have the invincibility thing going on, so we don't really need the extra safety measure of it only firing once. So we can just have it fire every frame, but only actually damage the player if they're not invincible. Alright, so we have an error. Line 167, probably forgot an F. Forgot an equal sign, even worse. Or no, actually it should be plus equals. Alright. No errors. Let's see what we got. Alright, moment of truth. Huh. So we have a weird error where the force is applying, but the invincibility isn't firing. You know what? I forgot to actually call the invincible thing. So we have to go to apply damage, say start coroutine, apply set invincible. Okay, so now if we play it and quote jumps onto the hazard, boom. He gets hurt, he starts blinking, then he's fine. Boom. And if he touches it while he's blinking, nothing happens. If he touches it while it's not blinking, stuff happens. So great. That's exactly how we want hazards to work. Boom. So yeah, that's going to be the end of this one. Next time we're probably going to get into enemies, because that's the next logical step from here. And enemies are going to use the contact hazard script, but they're also going to bring in getting damaged themselves and moving. So yeah, just hang tight for that one. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you liked it. And yeah, I'll be out with the next one soon. Thanks.